You can't simply say, well, the Iranians are bad and they've massacred lots of their population and therefore they should be punished. That's not really a strong legal argument, even if it might seem like a strong moral argument. And so I suspect there is more to come in terms of discussion between the UK and the US over exactly what they're trying to achieve.
Let's now turn to a very important geopolitical story. And this is the Chagos deal, because Keir Starmer's relationship with Donald Trump is being put under severe pressure over this deal. And the Prime Minister is now reported to be blocking a request by Donald Trump to let the US use this British air bases in Gloucestershire and on Diego Garcia in the Chagos Islands to launch airstrikes against Iran. Now, Keir Starmer is believed to have said that that would be a breach of international law, which has led President Trump to now withdraw his approval for the UK's plans for the Chagos Islands. Well, let's now speak with Matthew Savill, who is Director of Military Sciences at RUSI. Hello, Matthew. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
So just bring our listeners just up to speed on exactly where Britain and America are on the Chagos Island deals, because at one point America was supporting it, but now it looks like Donald Trump is taking that support away. What's the latest?
Well, if we're having to sort of partly read between the lines and go off what is coming out in media reporting, but having had, if you like, endorsement from the US system recently. We then had a call between President Trump and the Prime Minister this week. And then we had this statement from President Trump effectively decrying the deal. And the reporting, I think, from the Times has suggested that is because the UK has either formally turned down or indicated that it would not support the use of Diego Garcia as part of staging for an attack by US aircraft on Iran.
And just explain to us why the location of Diego Garcia is so germane to any attacks against Iran.
Well, yes, I think Diego Garcia is important because it's essentially a land, it's a set of islands, but the airbase is large in the middle of the Indian Oceans. It's a long way from Iran, but it's a similar distance as RAF Fairford and the UK from Iran. So aircraft that have flown, if you like, westwards from the US and that are travelling over the Pacific would stop there on the way to the Middle East or Afghanistan, or they would be refueled by other aircraft that took off from there. So it is part of a UK-run global network of facilities that the US has access to that extends the range of aircraft or helps support global operations.
So it's a useful point at which an American plane could refuel.
Indeed. I mean, the very first operations against Afghanistan, airstrikes on September the 11th were conducted by bombers that flew directly from continental US. And I think they still hold the record for the longest, in time bombing run. But the follow-up were from aircraft that were moved to Diego Garcia and then launched from there. So it's essentially provides a bit of extra range for aircraft. I should say, though, it's not critical when the US bombed Iranian nuclear facilities last year. They launched long-range bombers which took off eastwards from the US and flew uninterrupted. And the US does now have aircraft carriers in the region with jets on board. So it's not that an attack on Iran critically relies on these facilities, but surveillance aircraft, refueling aircraft, or other aircraft might want to move through the base.
And just tell us in terms of what will happen next with this Chagos deal, because the president has now publicly, well, he said it on Truth Social, I think, withdrawn his support for this deal. Does that stop the deal going ahead? Does that mean it has to go on pause? What happens next?
I mean, I honestly don't know, because a lot of that depends on whether or not President Trump will change his mind once again, what instructions his system has. Obviously, what we have in public is a statement by the UK government last year that they would only proceed with the deal if the US supported it, because at that time they had oral assurances that the US would and did support it. They seem to be suggesting that they will carry on with the deal for now. Maybe they think that President Trump will change his mind again. Maybe they think this is public performance. But I genuinely don't know what will happen next. It is, particularly for those of us who are less sort of politically attuned, slightly confusing as to why they are putting so much capital in this controversial deal at this time.
And where do you think we are in terms of the US being on the brink of taking military strikes against Iran? Do you think that is going to happen soon?
The huge question predicting what the US will do under President Trump, or indeed how the Iranians will handle whatever demands have been made of them. There's a big unknown, which is, are any of the talks that have been taking place under good faith? Has the US already decided that it's going to strike and it just wanted to assemble a larger force, which certainly seems to be the case in terms of the forces that are moving into the region? Are the Iranians serious, or are they just playing for time because they think a US strike is inevitable and their objective is to ride it out? I think we are certainly moving into a situation where there is a danger that both sides act as if strikes are inevitable and therefore they become inevitable. The big question is what the US thinks they might achieve, whether or not they also involve Israel, which is an additional factor we need to take into account.
And it's believed that Keir Starmer has said that these airstrikes, if America was to launch airstrikes against Iran, that he said that he believes this would be a breach of international law. Do you agree with that assessment?
Well, and an awful lot depends on what the US is trying to achieve. I mean, there's a starting point, which is that there is, in theory, quite a high bar for the use of force internationally under the UN Charter, and it's predominantly in terms of self-defense or restoring international order. But of course, there's a lot of interest in concepts like the responsibility to protect. So in other words, to prevent massacres or genocide or that kind of activity. And there's a lot of debate over what counts as an imminent threat. I think the current discussion, again, as we understand it, as it's been reported, makes it likely that the US hasn't provided an awful lot of clarity on what it is actually intending to do or seeking to achieve. And that means it's difficult for the UK to make a judgment on the military necessity. Does this achieve anything? You can't simply say, well, the Iranians are bad and they've massacred lots of their population and therefore they should be punished. That's not really a strong legal argument, even if it might seem like a strong moral argument. And so I suspect there is more to come in terms of discussion between the UK and the US over exactly what they're trying to achieve.
And it's also important to note that Britain has supported America in military strikes, up until very recently on lots of different things, hasn't it?
I mean, yes, although with an awful lot of, in some cases, caveats or indeed a distinct silence in public. So the UK was conspicuously quiet on whether it regarded there being a strong legal case for the strikes that the US conducted last year on the Iranian nuclear program, though obviously it felt that Israel did have a right to defend itself against Iranian ballistic missile attacks and other threats. Similarly, they've got themselves into a tangle over whether or not they support US military activity off the coast of South America in terms of these strikes on drug runners, which, in all honesty, look to have a pretty flimsy legal basis in terms of whether or not there is even a non-international armed conflict, as it's called, going on there, and therefore whether those are or aren't what we would call in layperson's terms murder. So I think the UK is trying to avoid, wherever possible, big public disagreements, but there will clearly be disquiet behind the scenes over the extent to which they can actually understand the rationale for some US activity.
Well, look, really interesting conversation. There's a lot going on, in that space, and it's really important that we stay abreast of it. That's really helpful stuff. Thank you, Matthew. That's Matthew Savill, who is Director of Military Sciences at RUSI.